Okay, so where are we? This is a picture of the upper room. Not really, but it's a room in Jerusalem for sure. If you ever visit Jerusalem and you go into the center core of the old Jerusalem, it looks just like this, doesn't it, Bob? I mean, yeah, everywhere you walk, it looks kind of crazy narrow like this. And for reasons I've never quite understood, they split the stairs. See that? There's some going up and some going down. So if you try and walk up the middle of this, you're going to be dead. It just doesn't work. Sometimes there's actually a flat section that goes to the middle, and this one actually has it. There's a little flat section in the middle, and they'll have little hand carts, single-wheel hand carts, that they'll take stuff in and out of the different places in town, and they'll run down that little center track. So it's crazy because there'll be so many people there, they'll run you over with the cart. Anyway, I put this here because today, what we're doing in the book of John is we're looking behind the scenes in the upper room. I introduced this last week. We've gone halfway through the book of John, and now the last half of the book of John is really a behind-the-scenes recording of what Jesus does with the apostles in roughly the last 24 hours before the crucifixion. It'll take us between now and the end of March to cover the last 24 hours of Jesus' life, believe it or not. That's John 13 and 14 and 15 and 16 and 17. All those chapters have to do with what Jesus tells the apostles in private in a room that looks just like this upper room. And so it's interesting, much of what you're going to see in these chapters coming up, starting today in 13, is not recorded in the other Gospels. And the reason for that isn't because John was making it up. The reason for that is that we know for sure that John wrote his Gospel many years after the other Gospels were written. It's very likely that he read their accounts and said, when I write my account, I'm not going to just double up everything they said. I'm going to make sure we put in stuff that they forgot to mention. So sure enough, 13 through 17, it's almost non-existent in the other Gospels. So this is really an intimate look at what Jesus is saying to the apostles in the last, I'd say maybe 20 hours of his life before the crucifixion. After today's event that we'll see in this upper room, in about 20 to 21 hours, Jesus will be dead in a tomb. So what do you do if you knew this was less than the last day of your life with these people that you've spent time with you love? What do you do? And so you answer that by seeing what's in 13 through 17. So we start in 13, and here's how John introduces it for us. He says, now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Great intro. He says his hour has come. Now, if you've been with us since we started John, remember certain things would come up, and he'd say, well, my hour's not come, my hour's not come, my hour's not come. And now he says his hour came. This is the hour where he'll be persecuted and killed. And he knew if he had done anything like this too early, then his death would be too early. But now the hour's come. And John also tells us that he loved those who were in the world, and he loved them to the very end. And today we're going to see the beginning of that process of loving them to the very end. So here's what you do. If you have 24 hours left in your life, what do? You'll love the people who you're with to the very end. It's not about you, it's about them. And this is what Jesus is going to do today. And he'll do something, frankly, astonishing to communicate that love. So let's see what he does. He'll love them to the end. John goes on. He says, during supper, and by the way, I'll be using pictures from James Jacques Tissot through all this. Not real photographs. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, there we go. Have to remind people that was not, yeah. So here we go. So during supper, the devil, having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, got up from supper and laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. So Jesus knows exactly what's going on. It's going exactly according to plan. In fact, if I back up and highlight these again, that's what it's saying right here. The devil has entered Judas. No surprise to Jesus. Jesus knows that the Father has given everything into his hands. That means he's in control. He's in authority. There's nothing that's just slipping by. In fact, there was a book written years ago called The Passover Plot. And it was written by a secular guy who was coming up with the craziest stuff about the crucifixion of Jesus. But his basic contention was that Jesus was a really nice guy, and he tripped, said some things too soon, got himself killed. Oh, well. No, it wasn't accidental. The hour has come, all things have been given into his hand, even knowing that the devil is in Judas. By the way, do you notice that no one ever names their kids Judas? Because of what he's going to do in a second. You'll see here. He come forth from God, he was going back to God. He got up from supper, and this is where the astonishing thing happens. He lays aside his garments, takes on a towel, and girds himself. Now, the only people in that culture that does that is a servant. And usually when you come for dinner. So if you were invited to dinner during those days, you would come to dinner, you'd walk in off the street. Immediately coming in off the street, you would take your sandals off, but your sandals, being very open-toed and open-heeled and open-soled and everything, would be just filthy. And so instead of bringing all that outside dirt from the inside, to the inside of the house, a servant, or usually the lowest classed person in the house, would come to you with a basin and they'd wash your feet so you wouldn't track in all that muck. And by the way, their streets were dirtier than ours because their sewage system ran in the streets. Ew. So just let your imagination go for a little bit. That's why you would wash these feet off before you came into a house. And so someone who would do that would basically strip down pretty much. They'd take off their clean clothes on the outside because you wouldn't want to soil those. You'd still be covered. You'd have something around here. And you'd kneel down and you'd wash people's feet as they came. That's how you greeted people when they came to your house for dinner. Jesus does this during the supper, during the meal itself. And he gets ready to do this. And I'm sure as he's doing this, as he's taking off his outer garments, as he's kind of getting all set to go, as he's finding water, I'm sure all the apostles are going, what's going on? I don't get this. Let's see what happens. Tissot, there's a photograph. I mean a painting right there. Well, verse 5, then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So he came to Simon Peter, and Simon Peter says, Lord, do you wash my feet? And Jesus answers and says to him, what I do you don't realize now, but you will understand hereafter. So thank God for someone like Peter. He's speaking us. See, here we are in this meal. They're getting the sense that this is some of the last hours of Jesus. Jesus just came in a kingly procession into Jerusalem. People used the catchwords from the Old Testament. He is the King of Israel. And he doesn't dispute it. And in fact, the Pharisees say to Jesus, Jesus, shut down your disciples. They got to stop saying that because that's not right because you're not the King of Israel. And he says, listen, if I shut them down and they don't speak out, who's going to speak out? The rocks themselves. This has got to happen because it's true what's going on. This is the guy who comes in this kingly procession, and now he's down doing what a servant in the house does and getting pretty mucky. Of course, he comes to Peter, and Peter, Mr. Foot in the Mouth, we love him because he speaks our words when we're thinking about it. Jesus comes to him, and Peter says, what? You're washing my feet? Now, you have to understand the emphasis in how this works. You have to emphasize the word Lord and you right there. Lord, do you wash my feet? Do you wash my feet? This is wrong. I mean, you're the guy that's in charge of our band right here. We've always followed you. We're your disciples, but you're washing our feet? Have you ever had someone wash your feet? It's very humbling, even when your feet are kind of moderately clean. I mean, but you're really not too sure because when you take your shoes and your socks off, you're thinking, well, I'm not sure how clean my feet are. And most people will then kind of pull your foot up. But in just a few minutes, whoever's going to wash your feet is going to get close enough that they'll know the condition of your feet. And I remember first time this happened, I was on a retreat. I was in high school. It was a kind of a church group thing, and one of the leaders there says, okay, everyone take your shoes off or I'm going to wash your feet. I'd never heard of this before. I'd never even read this passage before. So we're going to wash feet, and I'm thinking, why? He says, well, this is what Jesus does in the upper room, and we're going to do this. And so people are taking their shoes and socks off. I'm thinking, I think I don't want to do this. Because at the time when I was in high school, I changed my socks about once every month. I knew what the inside of my shoes smelled like because I did have those close to my face. They were bad. So I'm thinking, I've got to come up with a good way to say, well, I'm fine. I'm good with this. Like everybody else, there's a lot of people here. I'm good, And that's what I tried. And he came around to me and he says, you've got your shoes still on. Yeah, I know. it's fine. Just go on. And he wouldn't let me do that. He says, no, I'm going to wash your feet, or you don't have any role in this little retreat this weekend. You shouldn't be here. And so it's very humbling. It's very humbling, especially when they get close enough that they see the condition of your feet. And not only that, but then they touch your feet. And you get a little giggly sometimes. But I mean, they touch your feet, they're cleaning your feet, they're pouring water, they're drying it off with a towel. And you're embarrassed the whole time. It's really awkward. Because it feels like they shouldn't be doing that. I mean, it's not just because you're embarrassed about your feet, although that's a large part of it, but it's such a low thing for someone to do. Well, in this case, Jesus himself is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and their heads are just doing cartwheels. This is not right. So Peter objects. And of course, Jesus says, listen, you can't object. If you object, it's not going to be good for you. You don't really know what's going down right now. And we're going to see a little bit about what really is going down in a second. But largely, Peter doesn't get it. But he will later, he says. It's basically Jesus saying, trust me. So Peter comes back and says, never shall you wash my feet. Never. That's Peter right there with his hands on his head right there like, oh, what are you doing? Never shall you wash my feet. And Jesus says, listen, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. This is part of the program. You've got to do this. If you don't let me do this, you're off the team. This is necessary today. And you don't fully understand what's going down. I don't care if you fully understand. Just trust me. You got to do this. So Peter, being like us, he goes from one end where he says, never, not me. And you can just see pride and all that stuff kind of sticking out over here. So what do you think he does after Jesus says, if you don't do this, you have no part with me? Goes the other way. So he goes from one side to the other, and Peter says to him, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. Take me, I'm ready. From this side, never, to this side, do everything. I love Peter. You gotta love Peter. Okay, so I got the program wrong, Jesus. I'm in fully. Do my entire body. So Jesus comes back and says, well, wait a second, Peter. He who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. He's using what they understand. They would normally bathe in the morning. And then as you walk through the day, this part of you doesn't really get that dirty, but that part of you does get dirty. So he's just saying, listen, it's a natural thing. Through the day and through the end of the day, you don't need to have a full bath again. You just need to wash these. But Jesus is bringing in a bigger picture. The issue isn't really so much that all of you need to be washed physically, but there's an issue about the physical cleansing that comes from being born again with Jesus. He's starting to intimate about the fact that there's something about you that's already fully washed. But throughout life, you might pick up some scunge on your feet. There might be actually parts of life that you participate in which dirty your feet, but your whole body's not dirty because I've washed you because you're born again. But there are parts of you that might have to be cleaned. It's back to when a lot of you studied 1 John this last year. 1 John, he says in there, if you confess your sins, he's faithful and just to forgive your sins and cleanse you from all unrighteousness. That's not talking about the one-time event in your life. It talks about the daily washing of your feet from the things that stain you. But you don't need to be cleansed all over again. There's this misconception in some parts of Christendom that, after you become a believer, you become born again, that if you then start sinning, you need to be born again all over again. Let's do the whole washing and let's start all over again. And Jesus is saying right here, no, that's not what it's about. Once you've been cleansed, once you've been born again, that cleansing is done. But that's not to say you don't get your feet dirty. And so when you do, it gets in the way of your relationship with God. He says, bring it to me and just fess up to it. We'll take care of it. I will forgive it. It's done with. It's gone. So this is the beginning of what he's trying to get through in a bigger picture. And he also intimates right here in that you are clean, but not all of you. And who's the not all of you that's clean? Judas. So he's starting to hint about the fact of what's coming down in a second here as well. For he knew the one who was betraying him. For this reason, he said, not all of you are clean. So when he had washed their feet and taken his garments and reclined at the table again, here's the teaching moment. He said to them, do you know what I've done to you? And he says, you call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. By the way, every time you see the word Lord, substitute some heavy authority word like boss, in charge, super authority. That's really what Lord means. It's the top person who has authority to be in charge. I use the word boss, but that sounds a little bit too crass sometimes. But he says, you call me the boss, the Lord, and the teacher. That is everything, the truth. I'm the teacher, you're the students, you're the followers, I'm the leader, and that's all exactly right. He says, you've got that right. And so I am. Verse 14, if I then, the boss, the Lord, and the teacher, washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. So you see where he's going? You're right. I'm in charge. You've been following me 3 years. You've been watching what I've been doing. You've seen me raise people from the dead. You've seen me confront the Pharisees. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. You've seen me in every context. I'm the leader of this band. I'm the Lord of Lords and King of Kings. So if I've done this, what should you be doing? Right? For I gave you an example that you also should do as I did to you. So here's where Jesus is turning the tables upside down. He already turned the tables just the previous couple days when he came into town as the king, and then he immediately in a public context says, yes, yes, and now we must die. You know, remember the seeds being planted? He's turning that upside down. And now here he is again saying, if I'm up here and you guys are my followers, and I go down here, you guys can't stay up here. The leader goes low. How is that possible? What? So he's saying, if you indeed are following me, and I go low like a servant in the house to wash your feet, then where should you guys go? Low. Now this turns the authority structure of the church on its head. Because what he's saying is that in the world of the followers of Jesus, it's not about how high you can go. It's about how low you can go. How low can you go? It's like a spiritual limbo. How low can you go? And Jesus is saying, if that's what I did and you're following me, that's what you need to do as well. It's go low. This works its way out into huge practical organizational things. The world has this way in which, very naturally, we've been part of for our entire lives. This kind of pyramid structure where you have someone at the top, and then they have a couple people underneath them, and they have a couple people underneath them, and they have a couple people underneath, and there's this pyramid, and you're kind of way down here somewhere, right? And you know very clearly in the world who the authority structure is. I know who my boss is. I know who his boss is. I know, all the way up to the top. And the people that are higher have the right to tell the people lower what to do. Ever been in one of those structures? That's how everything runs. That's how everything runs. Jesus is saying, I'm tipping this on its head. I'm tipping this on its head. And in the church, we ought to be tipping it on its head. If you go to Mark 10, Jesus has this confrontation. Mark 10, I forget the Luke passage, but they're parallels. And he says to them basically this. He says, you've heard that the Gentiles lord it over. They boss over people, right? And they tell them what to do. And he looked at the apostles and he says, but it's not that way with you guys. What, that we boss people around? Right. The whole idea is that you will not be over to tell other people what to do. Well, what, like this high or like this high? I'll be a middle manager for Jesus. I don't need to be the CEO. And he says, no, the over part is gone. You will not have this over thing. Really? Yeah. So when you see structures, even in Christendom, where they tend to go back to the pyramid structure, part of me starts to get a little nervous about that, because it starts to invest in people high up, things that from Jesus' perspective were never meant to be there. In fact, later on, in Ephesians, we'll study this in a couple months, Paul even says it's the issue is that we're like a body, right? Hands, fingers, all of us collectively are a different piece, right? And we're all different pieces of this body. But there's only one head, and that one head is Jesus. Not some other head, not Joel Osteen. So the pyramid structure in the church is something you need to really think seriously about. That's not the process, because even right here, Jesus says, I went as low as I could go in here, and if you're following me, you need to go even lower. You need to serve. And as I thought about this over the week, I thought, anyone who I've ever had any kind of influence for good in my past, they have been influenced for good, not because I compelled them because I was over them. I had influence for good because I served out of love under them. And and if you think in your own life, that's clearly the case. The people who've invested in me that I've changed were people who said, I'm going to serve you, I'm going to exist for your best. I'm going to do everything it takes to help you, to invest in you. That's an under kind of thing. The over people, I can't think of anyone who over me gave me commands and I changed remarkably for the rest of my life. More than actually, I went the opposite way. I went, you don't know what you're talking about, right? There's something about the underness that evokes change and powerful influence from you on the lives of others. Yeah, Larry? Yeah, they're building your foundation. And it's built out of loving service, not out of authoritative commanding. And that's the whole issue. Now, before I go too far off this, I'm not condemning how the world does the pyramid structures. I was in a pyramid structure when I worked in industry, and I was kind of in here somewhere, and there are people under me. That's okay. It turns out that works well when the people near the top have a bigger picture of what's going on, so they need to coordinate things like that. Generals and armies need to coordinate things like that. That's a human-made structure, and I understand why it needs to exist. But Jesus is saying that in my family, it's radically upside down. So here the apostles came into town with Jesus. When Jesus came in with his kingly entourage, son of David, here he comes in. And I think many of them were expecting, well, if Jesus is up here, then we're just going to be one rung down from the top. Holy smokes, we got it made. And then in just a couple of days, Jesus says, nope, I'm going low, and so will you. If you want to serve me and build my kingdom and bring influence in the lives of people who are followers of Jesus, you got to go low, you can't go high. And that's just key right here. It's what he's doing. I think, Mark 10, late in Mark 10. Yes, that's the place. Yeah, Mark 10:31. Thanks. Excellent. So this is not just a single event where he's doing this. He's already told them about this. The authority structure is Jesus is in charge, and the rest of us are all on the same level.
Is that in us to respond to that because that's true?
Yes.
Respond,
yeah.
I don't want to respond to the authority, but then all of a sudden someone starts, and I respond in the beauty. Is that because I'm responding to the truth of what?
Yes. There is something, and we'll see just in a second here, there's something about when Jesus goes low and serves and even dies for us, we're compelled to follow and change. I'll talk more about this in a second, because we know this. We know this from human experience. I mean, we really know this. My mom, bless her heart, passed away about 5 years ago. Well, my mom, I'd look at my mom and I think she lived her whole life to serve us boys. There were 3 boys in our family. The reason I loved her so much is because she wasn't commanding, although she did, take out the garbage. But there was another side of her who loved me tremendously based on what she did for me. And I caught that. I did not miss that. So when she would come up alongside me and gently say, have you thought about this? Are you thinking about it? I go, oh, yeah, thanks, Mom. So there's influences we know. And those things are what changed me, not her wagging her finger to take the garbage out. It's those private moments where I saw her serving lovingly. Radically changed me. So this is what Jesus is getting at. This is the way it goes. If I gave you an example that you should do, then you also should do as I did to you. Truly, truly, I say to you. By the way, whenever Jesus starts with truly, truly, he says, listen. This is real. Listen. Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who's sent greater than the one who sent him. So if you know these things, you're blessed if you do them. So he says, you're not greater than me. I'm the master. I'm the guy in charge. So if I go low, follow me low. That's what's going to have to happen. So they really, after Jesus dies and he's resurrected, Jesus goes back to heaven, and the 12 apostles kind of spread out all over the world. They weren't sent to go out and invoke authority over the world, although they had authority. They didn't go to say, listen, I'm here from Jerusalem. I'm a secondhand man to Jesus himself. I'm here to tell you here. I've got my card. See, there's my picture. So I'm authorized to instruct you to, do what this. Do it. No, that wasn't the whole approach. The approach through them, Jesus says, is to go and serve in love. Serve in love. And I'm giving you an example right now to follow. Okay? We'll talk more about this in a second, because the whole chapter comes about this whole topic. 18, I don't speak of all of you. I know the ones I have chosen, but it is that the scripture may be fulfilled. He who eats my bread has lifted up his heel against me. And we're back to talking about the fact that Judas is in the room. He's giving instruction to his apostles, but Judas is still in the room, the one who will betray him. This is a quote from Psalm 41 right here, and it's really quite interesting. That psalm, it's talking about I don't really know how to say this, the worst social offense you could ever do, is to invite someone over for dinner and share a meal with them, and then they betray you. And that's exactly what this is saying. He who eats my bread. Yeah, I invited him over in hospitality for dinner. We shared a meal together. It's the warmest fellowship picture you can get in the ancient days, and almost for today even. I invited you for over dinner. We were friends. We laughed. We ate. You ate of my food. I provided for you lavishly. And then in the ancient metaphor, his heel against me. The heel against me, by the way, when you were in war and you won and the vanquished king was now in front of you, not dead, but at least captured or something like that. You know what the victor did symbolically after that? Just like a trophy. You would put your heel on their head or their neck and go, ha, he's under my heel. It's symbolically that you're crushing them. They've been crushed. So I invited you over for dinner. We shared food together. We were warm and loved one another. And next thing I know, you've got me on the ground with your heel on me. It's the worst. It's the worst turnabout that you can ever think. This is in Psalm 41. And Jesus is saying, at this very moment, the one whom I'm sharing bread with has got plans to put his heel on me. It's horrific. It's horrific. From now on, I'm telling you before it comes to pass, so that when it does occur, you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who receives whomever I send receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. By the way, that second phrase is something that they'll probably remember later as they're sent out across the world. So as they're rejected, they need to make clear to them, you're not rejecting me, Peter, you're not rejecting me, John. You're rejecting Jesus himself, because I've come to tell you about him. And Jesus right here says that's exactly the role you'll have. If they receive you, they'll receive me. And if you receive me, you receive the Father. It's the whole package. This is the job that's going to come up to them in just a little while. By the way, this last phrase at the end of 19, you may believe that I am, he's not in the Greek. Believe that I am. And remember, it's back to the catchphrase in the Old Testament when Moses asked God, who should I say sent me? What's your name? And he says, my name is I am. Jesus does this many times through the New Testament to signify his identity as God. I am. So I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, he's saying on the left side. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen so that, when it happens, you know that I am. I'm in control. I know what's going on. There's nothing here is happening accidentally. So when Judas does what he's going to do very soon and betrays Jesus, gears should start turning in their head. And they'll say, wait, didn't he just say this was going to happen? I mean, he's actually in charge of these events? None of this is taken by surprise? Could this all be a voluntary giving up to be killed? So all these things are turning in their head as they go along. When Jesus had said this, he became troubled in spirit and testified and said, truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. Now, why was he troubled in spirit? Have you ever thought about this? Was he fearing the pain of the cross? Yeah, I think, remember, when he just washed the feet of the apostles, he washed all 12, including Judas. Judas walked with him for 3 years. I think Jesus invested in the life of Judas lovingly as much as any of the other apostles. Here's this one with whom he shared bread for 3 years. And now he's going to turn on me. I think this is this is a unique view into the heart of God himself, that even though someone like Judas, who we always write off as being just a hopeless case, still, from God's perspective, he looks at Judas and it breaks his heart about what he's going to do. See, we can write off people like this as just being bad. So there's no reason why we should care if they self-destruct in some sense. But from God's perspective, that's not the case. He looks at Judas, and it truly troubles him in spirit, because Judas is going to do something that he wished he wouldn't do. Why? Not for Jesus' sake? No, for Judas' sake. For Judas' sake himself. There was a case similar like this. I think I've told this story before. In the hiding place with Corrie ten Boom during World War II in a concentration camp, she and her sister Betsy are in a concentration camp. And as they're outside standing in the cold, they're seeing a German woman guard beating mercilessly one of the Jews that's with them in this concentration camp. And Betsy says to Corrie, Betsy is watching this brutal scene, and she says, "Oh, that poor woman." And then Corrie says, "Yeah, look at the beating she's taking." And Betsy says, "No, I'm not talking about her. I'm talking about the guard. That poor woman. That poor woman who doesn't understand what sin is doing to her life." That's the thing that's going on here. Jesus looks at the heart of Judas, and his heart breaks because Judas is getting ready to take concrete steps that Jesus is breaking his heart about. The inflection of his voice, yeah. Yeah.
Was he trembling when he said that? Did it pain him so much that he knew he had to say this, reveal it?
Yeah, it makes you wonder. When he has these painful words, he says, "One of you is going to betray me." And I have to believe he was trembling. Yeah. Yeah. And this, by the way, he's fulfilling the promise he just gave a second ago, saying, "I'm going to tell you ahead of time so it doesn't freak you out." Yeah, I think I think they can hear if his spirit is trembling. I don't know how there's any way you can mask that in your voice.
Well, I'm wondering if
it's grief.
Side of God. I wonder if Jesus is the human
Yeah.
God.
But even if it's not just the human part, I think you see God grieving for the souls of those who intentionally choose evil, not because of what it does to them. It brings destruction, and that grieves God's heart.
I don't know if it's so much that as seeing the whole mindset of the people as a whole, because again, there's a wonderful text I read. It's a apocryphal book.
Right.
That talks about Judas being his childhood companion, growing up. And it was according to this
Right.
text, nobody was more of a fan of Jesus in the worldly sense. Like, this guy will reign. This guy will bring everything down.
Judas was a big promoter of what Jesus was going to be.
Cheerleader
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
this is going to be. And so the reading that text, I kind of thought, well, Judas is doing what he's doing because he wants to force the issue. He wants to force the hand and see it all happen. And when the angels didn't come and the Romans didn't fall, he went out and was crushed and hung himself.
Yeah. Despondent. Yeah, and I think we have to factor that in. The fact that he was so despondent afterwards means that it didn't happen the way he thought it would go down. He might have been well-intentioned, but clearly he was...
He missed the big picture.
Missed the big
I think
picture.
in
Yeah.
Christ's mind and heart, that's what troubled him, is there's people missing the big message here.
And he probably, more than anyone else in the room, missed the idea that the King of Kings and Lord of Lords needs to go as low as possible, and he needs to follow him. And he was hoping it would be a military coup, and it didn't happen. So, yeah. So, anyway, truly I say to you, one of you will betray me. Of course, this makes everyone in the room get a little nervous. So the disciples began looking at one another at a loss to know which one he was speaking. By the way, if you ever see Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper fresco, see that? That's supposed to be a snapshot taken right here, where they're looking at each other saying, "Is it me?" Because if you look at the picture, they're going, right? And interestingly enough, I'm encouraged by this right here, because they're not going to say, "Is it him?" They're going to say, "Is it me?" There was reclining on Jesus' bosom one of the disciples whom Jesus loved. That's a code word for John, because John never referred to himself by name in the book. He would say the disciple Jesus loved. So Simon Peter gestured to him. So here we have John. He's very close to Jesus in this sitting. By the way, this picture's sort of wrong. They didn't sit on chairs when they ate. They reclined. You laid down. And you basically, since you ate with your right hand, you would lean kind of against your left side. You kind of recline on your left side. And you do that all the way around the circle. So, eventually someone was kind of in your face and you were in someone else's face. You were around like this. And the feet all went out to the outside for a very good reason. So see, this is how it works. So someone had to be closest to Jesus as they reclined like this. By the way, you eat with your right hand because your left hand is for unsanitary things. So that's how you do this. So they're leaning like this and they're eating. So one is actually very close to him. This is John, according to this picture. John is the one who's closest to Jesus. So Peter, across the table or wherever he is, decides, let's get John to ask Jesus who the guy is. So Peter gestures to him, which I think is interesting. He doesn't shout out, hey, who is it? He's like trying to get John's attention. Psst, psst, psst. He's gesturing to be kind of gentle here, and says basically to John, this is to John, tell us who it is of whom he's speaking. Okay, ask him. So he, leaning back thus on Jesus' bosom, said to him, Lord, who is it? Which is why in the pictures of the Last Supper, you see John doing this, because he's the one who's close enough. Maybe from the apostles' perspective, he's the only one who's safe enough to broach this with Jesus. Clearly it's not John. He's one of the younger guys, and he's really nice. You ask him, because it's probably not you, right? So he asks. Jesus then answered, that is the one for whom I shall dip the morsel and give it to him. So when he had dipped the morsel, he took and gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Now keep in mind, he's having a private conversation with John right here, which will explain what happens next, which is why we wonder why it is when Jesus does such an obvious thing, the rest of them don't catch it. Because almost everyone agrees when Jesus says this, he's just saying this to John. John has this, who is it, Jesus? And Jesus says, the one who I dip my bread in the wine right now, watch. And no one else heard this. It's the only way you can explain what happens next. After the morsel, Satan had entered into him, into Judas, and therefore Jesus said to him, what you do quickly. And no, he's talking to Judas. Judas. And by the way, too, if you think that Judas is a hapless dupe of Satan, that he has no way of reason of saying no, you got to erase that idea. There is no sense in which Judas did what he did because he was coerced to. Judas invited this to happen to himself. But after all, he's sitting right there at the table with Jesus. Judas is. Judas could say, I'm struggling, Jesus, save me from this temptation to turn you in. Satan's kind of bearing, and he could have done that. And Jesus is definitely more powerful than Satan. And Jesus could have said, deal, I'll protect you from him. In the Lord's Prayer, he says in part of it, deliver us from evil, or deliver us from the evil one. God can do this. So what Judas does, he does voluntarily. And he wants this to happen. And as soon as Jesus sort of gives him permission to follow through, Satan takes over and does it. Yeah.
Again, that goes back to that worldly power.
The worldly power, yeah.
He wants that power. He wants it now.
And it's probably cloaked. He's probably not saying yes to Satan. He's probably saying yes to power.
He wants that.
Satan takes advantage of this and it happens. The theoretical question comes up, could Judas have relented right here? And could he have turned and made everything right and Jesus would have protected him from Satan? Could he have? I think he could have, to tell you the truth. I think he could have. It's hard to explain how we would get saved after that because Jesus wouldn't get arrested. But God's very creative for that. But you just have to understand, Judas really did have a choice in all this. But when he gave in, he was taken advantage of by Satan.
But Judas, he had made a big deal with the government for the money.
Yeah, he made a deal with the government for money. Yeah. So that's what he's going to go do. Yeah, Larry. Oh, the difference between Judas' betrayal and Peter's denial. Yeah. They're actually very close, it turns out. The betrayal part, though, he's actually giving him over. The denial, he's just denying that he even knows him. So it's slightly lighter on Peter's case, but it's a public image thing. Judas was very bent on and committed to turning over Jesus to the authorities, potentially in order to trigger a power struggle that eventually Jesus, the Messiah, would win. So that betrayal was something that was strategic. In Peter's case, it was just yellow. He was just a coward. He just did. Could he repented after?
Could he have repented?
Could have.
It seems, he went out and hung himself.
Yeah, he hung himself,
So
yeah.
was he sorry because it didn't go the way he was hoping it would go, or was his heart repentant in that?
Boy, what a great question. When he
Realized what he did.
Yeah. It's a great, we don't know.
Well, didn't Judas go to, Judas went to men, threw the money, he went to the men, and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I messed up. Peter, went right to
Yes.
down, Lord, he didn't try and go talk to all these people. He repented right to the Lord, like Judas was looking for.
That's a good distinction. And maybe that's the answer to Larry's question about denial versus betrayal, because
Judas
yeah.
is like looking to these men, here's the money back. Can I get is it okay? And Peter just went right to the Lord.
Yeah, Peter went to the Lord. And in fact, Peter goes to the Lord, and this is for the sake of the people who are listening on the tape, by the way. Peter went to the Lord, because they can't hear what you're saying. I'm just loving it, though. So Peter goes to the Lord to find fixing the problem with his own sin. Judas doesn't. Judas could have, potentially, but he doesn't. So, hypotheticals of the Bible, we're not sure.
Didn't Jesus actually go to Peter?
Well, we'll see it unwrap in the next couple weeks. Okay, yeah, Jesus is the one who actually makes contact with Peter, and it's devastating to him. Devastating. But it's only by way of non-verbally saying, I told you so, in a reminding way. Yeah. Yeah. God's will is being done. Yeah.
But it wasn't even Judas. So after when the crucifixion went through, all of the apostles wow.
Yeah.
What?
All the apostles flake.
Wow.
Yeah.
But, to Judas,
Yeah.
it was even more.
Yeah.
It's hopeless.
Yeah, and I think what you're seeing is a distinction here between the real followers of Jesus, the 11, and the guy who looks like a follower of Jesus, the one in Judas. I mean, he might have been misdirected and misguided in some sense, but there's a real sense in which his heart wasn't given to Jesus the way Judas was, and as the rest of the apostles. And it's a distraction. So there's really a love relationship going on between them, which is probably the difference. And by the way, too, that's an interesting analog to what goes on in churches. There are a lot of people who sit in church who kind of like Judas, although I won't call them Judases, but who kind of like Judas think that the presence in the band makes them part of the band. And in reality, the ones who are the true followers of Jesus are the ones whose hearts are broken and given to him and just amazed at his love for them in response. We could talk about this for hours, but it's really a radical difference between the two. And it's hard sometimes just to explain that, to explain that. Are you a follower of Jesus? Well, yes, I am, We got up today, Judas would say, and we followed him all over the place, and we saw miracles. Man, I'm a follower of Jesus. In the end, his heart's not given to Jesus. He's really not a follower, although he's in the saddle with everybody else. So, it's the right place. Do we have texts that say he wasn't saved? Pretty close. Pretty close when Satan fills his heart. Yeah. Okay, let's push on. This is great stuff. John gives us a little commentary every time I put the microphone. This is John giving us his commentary years later. Now, no one of those reclining at the table knew for what purpose he had said this to him. That is, talking to Judas to do what you do quickly. Which, by the way, see, that's amazing. If he announced, the one who I dip my bread in and give to right now is the one who is betraying me, Judas. So clearly this is a conversation with John that's very quiet and heard. They're not privy to this. So when Jesus says, do what you're going to do quickly, they did hear that, but they didn't know why. They didn't know what for purpose he said this to him. For some were supposing because Judas had the money box that Jesus was saying to him, buy the things we have need for the feast, or else that he should give something to the poor. So basically he had some kind of financial thing he was going to go out and do. So by the way, also in the pictures you see of the Last Supper, and you'll see this in Da Vinci's as well, you can pick out Judas because he's got a money bag in his hand. He must be Judas right there. So they're clearly clueless. They don't know what's going on here. So after receiving the morsel, he went out immediately, and it was night. He receives the morsel. Jesus says, do what you're going to do quickly, and he's out there. And John gives us this very ominous last phrase. I think it means more than the fact that it's dark outside. At this point, Jesus goes into the night, spiritually speaking as well. I mean, from this point on, life for Judas just goes downhill. From bad to worse to suicide. He goes off into the night, into the full control of Satan, and he's a voluntary participant with him in the entire thing. The scene changes. Therefore, when he had gone out, and Jesus is waiting for him to go out, Jesus says, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him immediately. Now, if your head is spinning, that's okay. Because you're going, well, what? Yeah, exactly. You should be doing a what right here, because this is kind of crazy talk. wait, who's in who and what is glorify and which are the hymns in this whole thing? So I've done the service of retranslating this for you. So just take this with a grain of salt. This is Jim's translation. But this is what I normally do. When I see the word glorify, I always replace in my head awesomely reveal. And when I say awesomely, I don't mean, oh, dude, awesome. I don't mean that kind of awesome. The awesome I'm talking about is the original meaning of awesome, which means to see something and it strikes awe. Your response is awe, okay? So glorifying is when something about a person or a thing is revealed, it's made, it's put in front of your eyes, and it's put there, and your response is, so an awesome revealing, that's glorifying. So when God is glorified, that means you're taking who he is, putting it out on a billboard, making it known, not secret anymore, and you go, it just takes your breath away. Awesomely revealed, okay? So I'm going to replace that, and also every time you see glorify, I'll replace those with that, and every time you see these pronouns, him, himself, him, I'll tell you who he's talking about, okay? So here's Jim's translation, and see if this helps in any way. Now is Jesus awesomely revealed, and the Father is awesomely revealed in Jesus. If the Father is awesomely revealed in Jesus, the Father will also awesomely reveal Jesus in the Father, and will awesomely reveal Jesus immediately. What's going to happen in the next 20 hours is that true nature of God himself will be revealed as the true nature of Jesus is made revealed. Well, what's going to happen in the next 20 hours that's going to tell you something about God that you're going to stand back and go, oh, what is it? Is it about his magnitudinous power and splendor, his ability to bring justice to the unjust?
Just being led to the slaughter.
Being led to the slaughter. But why is that awesomely revealing the very heart of God himself? What is it about God that the cross, the crucifixion, what Jesus is going to go through, that we stand back and shudder and we're in awe? Yeah, the depth of his love. Could it be that God loves us so much that he would die for us? That's what it is. And this is what up to this point is not understood by man, is that, okay, God is in charge. I get that. I mean, he made everything. But does God love me so much that he would die? Because he loves me? Would he go that low? Well, he washed our feet. He'll go lower. He'll go all the way down to where he'll be killed by unjust men. That's how low God's willing to go. Not just because he's into servanthood, but because he wants to love us with a love unmistakable. So that when you see what happens on the cross, we'll stand back and go, oh, is that God? He would die for me? Yeah, and what he went through before.
And then what he went through on the cross before
Yeah.
he died. Who of us would ever say, like you said, I'll lay down my life for you, but make it quick. Don't,
Yeah, right. If I lay my life down, make it swift, okay? I don't want to hurt in the process. It was long and drawn out. So, I mean, here, the one thing about the nature of God you don't really need to teach people is that God is omnipotent, and he's powerful, and he's in charge, and justice will come, and he's big. But the one thing you don't catch is that he loves you so much, he's willing to die for you. How can that kind of a God love me that much? And so that's why he's saying right here, when Jesus is awesomely revealed, that he voluntarily is going to die, he'll awesomely reveal also the heart of the Father, because, they're like this. Can the creator of the universe love me that much? Yeah. And that's an awesome revealing. You could almost go as far as to say that the entire timeline of the creation of the universe has come to this point, so that God can express his love he has for us, his creatures, and he has to express it in a way that's undeniable, so that we'll look at it and say, gosh, he's not only powerful, he loves me. He actually loves me. And that revelation, that understanding that he brings to us, causes us to take a couple steps back and go, oh, really? So when Nicodemus comes to him several chapters before this in the dark of night, because he doesn't want to blow his covers being a religious leader, and he comes to him, and Jesus says, listen, Nicodemus, here's the truth of everything that's going on. God so loved the world that he gave his son. Awesome reveal. And that's what it's all been about. That's what the reveal has all been about. God so loved. That's why this whole thing is in process. Let's move on. By the way, those of you who are into grammar, this is a chiasma, which means that the first and last lines say pretty much the same thing, and the second and next to last line sees the same thing, and the middle line is the middle. You go in and you come out. But that's no big deal. Okay, here we go. Little children, I'm with you a little while longer, and you'll seek me. And as I said to the Jews, now I'll also say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come. And their response is, what? Why? And before Peter has a chance to stick his foot in his mouth, Jesus goes on and says, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. And by this, all men will know that you're my disciples, if you have love for one another. And you read that and go, well, sure. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, so love is a good thing, right? And so Jesus is saying, do the good thing, love each other. It's bigger than all this. He says, in fact, he says, see in the end of 34, even as I have loved you, actually you can translate that Greek with, since I have loved you, you should love. The whole ability to be able to love like Jesus is talking about is absolutely impossible for us. Because it could mean that you actually lay down your life for somebody else. I am not prone to do that. And you're probably not either. It's a dimension of love that Jesus says, if you do it like this, if you love like this, they'll know you're my disciples. You see, up to this point, for the last 3 years, people would know that they're the disciples of Jesus because they'd walk into town with him. Hi, I'm with him, right? Soon he's going away. So for them to walk into town, they can say, hi, I'm a disciple of Jesus. Prove it. I'll love you like Jesus loved. And that was their calling card. Again, not an authoritative thing, down on. It's not a down on authority. It's I need you to come into town and love. If you love from the bottom up, they'll know you're my disciples. If you love in a way that's supernatural, that costs you even your life, they'll know you're my disciples. But he does have a clause here. Since I loved you like this, you should love like that. He's really implying, and Paul will pin this down later in his letters, that there's something enabling in you to love because you understand his love for you. I mean, it's actually a transformational thing. There are, I guarantee you, people in this room that I have problems loving. I have to make sure to make eye contact right here. And you too, come on, quit, don't look at me. So there's people who we naturally love and people that we don't naturally love. And the people that we don't naturally love, we use the word patience and forbearance and tolerance and don't encourage him and all that kind of stuff. See, we use all that kind of stuff. Jesus is saying you have to love all of them, even the ones that are impossible to love. Jesus died for us while we were yet sinners, Paul says. And I'll tell you, we are intolerable to each other, but not to God. He still sees our hearts and would die for us and would love us. He says that's the kind of love that when you walk into town, people say, where'd you come from? People haven't loved me like this. It's that kind of servant low love that transforms people and gets their attention. And says, I've been trying to chase people away my entire life by being a brat and being angry and shouting and cursing at people. I've been doing that all my life, and yet you don't respond like everyone else does. So is Jesus saying, love when you can't love? He's saying love because I loved you. And there's something empowering that he does in us. Now, I've experienced this. It's not just an increase in patience with people. There is a sense in which people that I meet who I would not normally say, hey, let's go out and do lunch together, who I meet and my outside goes, yeah, well, yes. And something inside me is deeply moved on their behalf. And I don't know where that came from. I do know where that came from because he loved me and he's changing me to have that same kind of love. There's a thing I studied when I was in electromagnetics in college. If you take a magnet, did you know if you take a magnet and you stick it on a piece of metal, on a piece of steel, that if you leave it there for a long time, you know what happens to that steel? It becomes magnetic. In a real same kind of way, the closer you are connected to and understand the love of God in your life, dying for you, love, that rubs off and you become magnetic as well. There is, and I can't fully explain it, the mechanisms, but there's something about the closer you dwell inside understanding the love of God for you, you start to become a lover like him. And people say, you must be a disciple of Jesus. Yeah, exactly. He does this in you. Let's move on. We're running short on time. So Simon Peter says, Lord, where are you going? Oh, man, he missed the whole love discussion. Did you notice that? He didn't say, well, I can't love like that. He goes back to, excuse me, where are you going? Oh, it's Peter. Yeah, he's still stuck on a couple friends. Yeah. So where are you going? And Jesus says, okay, listen. He answers, where I go, you can't follow me now, but you will follow later. And so Peter says to him, well, Lord, why can I not follow you right now? I'll lay down my life for you. See, we know where this is going, don't we? So again, Peter, bless his heart, because he's so much like us. He speaks when we would have spoken. And I'm glad he took the heat instead of me. But he says, I want to follow you, because that's the kind of guy I am. I'll even lay down my life for you, doggone it. Now remember, this is actually the definition of real Christ-like love, is to lay down your life. He's going to prove for us in a second that we can't do the new commandment on our own, because he's going to try it right now, the new commandment to love. He's going to try it. I would even lay down my life for you. So Peter, he gets his answer back. Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, which means listen up, listen up. I say to you, a rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times. Will you die for me? Before daybreak. Not once, not twice, but 3 times you'll say, I don't know him. Oops. By the way, just as an FYI, most people think that Peter never really got to unwind those 3 denials until post-resurrection, Jesus meets him up in the Sea of Galilee, and they're sitting on the bank of the Sea of Galilee, cooking fish in the morning, and Jesus says to Peter, do you love me? Of course I do. Do you love me? I do. Do you love me? I do. Unwound. But this sticks in his craw. You'll deny me 3 times. So we got to quit. Here's the summary in Jim's translation. Now is Jesus awesomely revealed, and the Father is awesomely revealed in Jesus. The heart of the Father, the heart of God himself, is to love us and to die to demonstrate that love for us. That's the awesome revealing. By the way, you started reading Hebrews, some of you ladies, this week. How does it start off beginning Hebrews? He's the radiance of the glory and the exact representation of his nature. So if you're seeing Jesus die and demonstrating his love, you're actually seeing God's heart for us. Demonstrate out loud. Yeah.
Is that why you find people that have such pull to stay away from the cross? Because that's where all the power is at.
Bingo.
You know what I mean?
I'd rather not look at the
Yeah,
cross.
if we can get them to not look, because that's where
Exactly. Exactly. I think that's why there's a distraction not to look at the cross. Because the longer you do, the longer you realize he died for me. Right. And the love of God starts to reveal that, the awesome revealing of the nature of God himself. To wrap this up this morning, I'm going to do something with you just really quickly. And this will take 2 or 3 minutes, so be patient with me. I want you to go back for a second to the upper room and imagine yourself as one of the apostles. Okay? And you're sitting around that table. And Jesus gets down on his knees, strips down, gets that basin of water, and he's going around person to person, and he's coming up to you. And then as he comes to you, he starts to wash your feet. Now, what I want you to just close your eyes for a second and just imagine that scene. He's washing your feet, and he's very gently pouring warm water over your feet, and he's caressing and cleaning all the nastiness that you picked up during that day. And then suddenly he looks up at you. And suddenly he looks up at you, and you make eye contact. And you feel ashamed for the dirt you've collected that he has to deal with. And he doesn't say a word, but he just continues to rinse and to wipe And the things that are even disgusting to you, he's dealing with. And he's kneeling in front of you. And during the entire time, all you can think of is, why are you doing this? Make eye contact with him. And just right now, thank him for the fact that what he did for you on the cross didn't just wash your feet. It washed you fully. And your heart says, why me? And his eyes say, because I love you. Okay, come back for a second, because I think throughout the entire lives of the apostles, this is one of Jim's kind of suppositions. I think when the apostles would go around the world and talk about Jesus, I think that some of them might have said, can I tell you about the last time he touched me? We were in this room. We were having dinner. He was saying a lot of confusing things to us. We didn't understand half of what he said, but we eventually did. The last time he touched me, he took care of the dirty me. And in the next couple days, I realized that on the cross, he really took care of the dirty me. And he can take care of the dirty you because he loves you. The last time I saw Jesus, he was washing my feet. Sorry. And that's why when John starts chapter 13, he says he loved them, and he loved them to the very end. And he wanted them to know that throughout their entire lives. And why? Just so they'll feel loved? No, so that they'll be transformed in their ability to love others, and as a result, others will come to fall in love with Jesus. Because they commanded it, because they had apostolic authority? No, because Jesus loved them. And that's our message as well. We don't go around shouting in authoritative ways. We tell people, I just want you to understand the God who would come and love me and die for me. He loves you as well. And the last time he touched me, he was washing my feet. See, that's a transforming influence on the lives of others. That's what he did for them. That's what he did for us on the cross. Next week. Next week, they're still disturbed. And I would be too. And so he starts out next week with saying, don't let your heart be troubled. Even though Peter got in the way, asked where we're going, he'll say, don't worry. It's going to work out. Everything's going exactly according to plan. So we start chapter 14. You can sneak ahead and read 14 if you'd like to. And that's okay with me. We're going to do the first half of it. This intimate discussion with this one whom they have come to love so much. And after this foot washing and about the loving, they've come to love him even that much more. And yet he's going away. And this is good news. Don't be troubled. Got it all figured out. Okay? See the intimacy of these upper room discussions? It gets even better. I cry all the way through 17. So anyway, so read it. We'll go back in 14 next week. Let's pray and quit this morning. Father, what a tender scene. What an extraordinary scene. As if washing our feet wasn't enough, then you go and you die for us. And Lord, we look at the dirtiness of our feet and we look at the dirtiness of our lives, and it's embarrassing, and it's stinky, and it's repulsive, and we're convinced that that dirt that we've accumulated, that we have voluntarily slapped on ourselves in some cases, we're convinced that because of that scummy layer, no one could ever love this. No one could ever love through this. And yet that's exactly what you were telling them, and that's exactly what you've done for us. So, Lord, our hearts are full because of your love that went as low as the cross itself and went as low as death itself. And and we've become hopeless wrecks as a result, as we've been washed in your love and come away daily wondering about this God who loved us so much, he'd die for us. It's just astonishing. It's astonishing. Lord, we pray that your love would be manifest through us as well. Change us so that in the ways we love, you would love through us and draw many to you and come to understand the tremendous love you have for mankind individually, even through and despite the dirt on our feet. So thank you for your great love for us in this powerful passage that draws us back to you. Thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.